Welcome to Airwave. Airwave is a conversation hosted by me, Morgan Page, where music and technology converge to tell the stories behind the artists and the architects of creativity and technology. Radio is where I first discovered electronic music in the countryside of Vermont, and music and technology provided the path forward. Airwave is an exploration of how people make their art and how technology plays an essential role in the process. The show is largely conversational, but doesn't shy away from going deep and technical in the process. All right, so my guest this week on Airwave is Luca Pretolesi. He is a world-renowned mixing and mastering engineer. He's done huge records like Mi Gente for J Balvin, big tracks for Diplo, Steve Aoki, and many others. He even makes his own plugins, so we're going to go super deep into the process, the technical details, his workflow, how he approaches his day, and much more. And we did this during the quarantine lockdown, so it felt very timely to get this out right now. So enjoy. This is Airwave with Morgan Page. Airwave is brought to you by RME Audio. Innovative, user-friendly, and high-quality digital audio solutions, RME offers a comprehensive range of audio interfaces, converters, and mic preamps, all based around its unique and innovative core technologies. Multi-platform connectivity across Windows and Mac OS and iOS class compliance has earned RME a global reputation for providing support to all users on all platforms. Visit rme-usa.com to learn more.
Being Vegas, the entire Las Vegas Boulevard, it's like that right now. Like literally shut down every club, every casino, everything's off. My worry is if we get too close to the summer, they're gonna skip the summer. They're not gonna take a risk to book $1 million like lineup of DJ for the season. You know what I mean? Like it's get to the point that also all the executives, they're like working from home or like detached. No one is taking an initiative to make an executive decision. Yeah, let's book for June. I think this, I don't want to be negative, especially my message now online and everything is just uplifting, like let's make music. Right. But between us, like on the industry, like on the business side, it's not really for people like myself or maybe you, but like, well, you is going to be affected from live shows, I'm sure.
Well, isn't the timing crazy too? Because I feel like Vegas really corrected with chaos.
Yeah,
I mean, you have chaos imploding before all this. I mean, you couldn't ask for like a worse domino effect. But I think, it was a trend that was overdue. I think the boom of EDM went further than a lot of people expected. Exactly. That kind of growth, because you can't just be like doubling and tripling the growth every year. It's crazy.
Yeah, really true.
But I think it's interesting now. I'm curious what's going to persist and last. Like, is it going to? Are people going to do more live concerts? Are you changing the way you work with Studio DMI? I mean, you have a lot of remote collaborations that you would do anyways and remote seminars. Is it going to change anything in a long-term way?
Yes, actually, yes. So I was in the middle. I mean, actually, I was right on the edge to travel the first date of my award tour. And then I pulled the plug, of course, like a week before. It was like 12 dates between Paris, Amsterdam, and Colombia, all that. So what we're going to do, we're going to convert this on the online version of that, and planning working on 6, like breaking down my actual physical workshop in 6 different episodes, and everyone will touch a portion of my curriculum. And I'm gonna probably gonna do high quality streaming using audio movers, and then do a Zoom interactive streaming. So what's going to happen? I'm going to do 1 hour and 30 minutes where everyone is with me. I'm going to have a host next to me, kind of like moderating and taking questions and going over concept ideas, and a very extended Q&A at the end. Try to make more personal. I want to do this in a limited edition where I'm not going to have like a limited number of people, just like maybe 20, and just like do it almost being a class together. What happened right now, I feel in a positive way, is people are focused. There's less distraction, like just focus on that. I encourage to stay away from news. I think there's like such a negative effect of have a passive, negative, kind of like input that you're getting. Like it almost like be exposed to noise for a long time. You get tired. I think being exposed to that, you're going to get really tired. So what I do myself right now, I try to force myself to have a routine, for example, where I get information for a source that I trust, one time a day, done for the day, and the rest I stay in a very tight routine, which is physical. I want to take care of my body. I want to eat right. I want to make sure that I don't panic in a way that I'm not going to change based on this. I try to focus on myself and have a discipline in place, which is very important.
Right. Because I think it is so easy to just refresh the news and just be scrolling, and you're not really getting a lot of useful information. I think you can only do what is in your control to stay sane. Right. So, but I think it's so interesting. Like, I mean, we've had this renaissance of learning, and you've seen this huge rise in music education.
Yeah.
But now people are at home. They're probably making more splice packs than ever. I think Splice is kind of pledged to do more. I mean, this is the time to make sample packs. I was, EDX's guy, Christian Hurt, was doing some crazy packs. He's never had the time to do it.
Right.
He produces under so many monikers, but this is the time, man.
The interesting part is I kind of find myself do the same things where before I was jumping between mixes and do a lot of work. Now I kind of like take care about my desk. I organize my presets. I kind of like, it's interesting. Like part of me, it feels like, okay, how I can use this additional time that I'm not going to spend hang around the city or do anything to just make my future life better. So I kind of like, I think I'm doing a good job on that. That what I'm missing is, as far as the social life, is the fact that I'm spending usually in this building majority of my life, and we are social animals. So, right. You know, we feel good when we are together. And now just be by myself, or like with Scott that I see across the aisle, say, how you doing? It's just weird. And so I try to be close to my friends or people that work with me more on a personal level. So how you doing? You know, how things your life? Like, and for me, being an Italian, I have an additional stress of like, follow friends and family in a country that is being, you know, it's like devastated right now. So yeah, I need to just like hit.
Yeah, to get that routine, I find it crazy hard with there's no daycare, so I have a 19-month-old daughter, and she's just, it's full time. There's not much time left to do the work. Yeah. But I think it's so key to get the work done, to make use of every minute that you have. I mean, I think some people don't know what to do with themselves. They're used to working in a typical workplace.
That's true.
I know here it's interesting. Like my studio is still the same garage studio, still attached, just removed enough from the house. There's a little bit of work balance, work-life separation. But man,
we want to talk about gear, or
yeah. Dude, there's all kinds of stuff I want to talk about. Well, since this is a podcast and long form, we can go as deep and as detailed as you want.
It's awesome.
Because that's the beauty of it. And what I love with podcasts is it can't get taken down like a music mix show.
I love it, man. I love it. I agree. So cool.
And that's the biggest problem. Even when these live broadcasts we're seeing, at least Facebook will mute a section of the stream for whatever copyright infringement there is, but other ones, YouTube takes the whole thing down. So just talk, baby. You can't take my voice down. That's what, especially on Spotify too, because they will take down music podcasts even on Spotify now.
True, right?
Isn't that crazy? But okay, so I want to start from the beginning. Tell me how you got into all this at an early age. I mean, you've been doing this forever. Where did this start?
Yeah, it's I'm old, so I can talk for days. But so interesting. Right now, I always say that that's my second life. There's things I want to share with everyone right now that, as a concern of age versus career, that absolutely doesn't matter anymore. And I proved this myself. So everything that probably people know about myself, my work, or the company that I'm part of, everything literally started in 2012. So 2012, my second life, where everything, Grammy nomination, all that, like we do 600 mixes a year, something crazy stuff, happening and starting in 2012. So I relocated from Italy in early 2002 to Vegas. I was involved in music. Well, first of all, one step back. When I was very young, 17, 18, 19, I did 3 years as a proper recording school. I learned how to be a recording engineer, a mixing engineer. I went so deep, but then I never really apply it till late. So it's one of those things, you have the knowledge, but then I became a producer, and in my country, the dance scene exploded in the mid 90s, equal to North America in 2012, like 2013. Right. Like, we had a moment where dance music was making money and just being like, it was the thing. So I was involved in that in different way. Be an artist myself, producer, help other people. I was doing that. Then all this scene in Europe kind of fades at the end of the 90s. And I lost a little bit of inspiration, and I was not sure what to do other than, of course, my passion, my dedication and love for music and literally what I do, which is mixing and mastering. Relocating to Vegas, I think I find myself in the center of the new capital of dance music, being here, offering something that no one was focusing back then, which is the post-production work of music. So amazing producers, a lot of talents, a lot of good ideas, but everyone was focusing on produce and perform. Me, being older, I was focusing on being the guy backstage and help everyone to have the best possible quality music out and improve. That can be a few percentage based on an excellent producer to do a creative mixing work with somebody that's like a raw talent, but needs the technical knowledge that I had. So then my focus shift to be, okay, I'll be your partner behind the scene to help you, first of all, to be on schedule with your releases. A lot of touring artists, they on the road 250 days a year. It's really, really hard to commit on release day. And then for me, it was like, so let's build a communication. Let's start talk the same language, where you take the song at the point that you can, and I'll take over, and I'll make sure that we retain that standard. No matter what, if your song is suffering because you're doing a collab with another producer that is making some sound design decisions that is affecting the overall track, well, I'll take it, and I'll try to do my best to elevate the quality and make sure that we raise the bar and we keep the bar at that level. So in 2011, I was helping friends. I don't think they keep producing anymore, named Peace Treaty. And back then, they did, So interesting. They, through a friend, they played music for me. It's like, man, I think Afrojack liked my stuff. And we tried to go to DMAC, and I say, guys, you need to have a better mixing. Like, your mix is not on point, and I want to help you guys. And I did. And then they released a remix on DMAC, and Steve was like, what's going on? Why your stuff sound that good? And then from that point, I was in touch with Steve. They were still in the phase of growing. It was not Steve Aoki, the superstar yet, but it was getting there. And then DMAC was just start to become an actual label. And I started to help Steve Aoki. Then from that point, I had a similar scenario where I got an email from Diplo say, hey, I heard you're doing pretty good mixing and mastering job. Like, are you down to check my stuff? So I find myself on a span of maybe 9 months to be involved in a lot of big record without a strategy. It was not like, hey, those songs going to be a hit. And, no, it was like, it's a moment. It was like momentum. Like, I want to put out stuff. And I was like, okay, I think I can help you. And I was very transparent and honest. Like, I never been like a salesman, like, hey, please give me a chance. It was more like, I can generally feel that I can help you to touch few things on your mix, not reinvent your mix. My point was like, I'm not a mixing engineer from the 80s. I'm not CLA, Tony Maserati, where I'm taking your song, I pull the fader down, and I do my job. It's more like I'm a modern engineer where, like, I'm taking what you up to. We have a conversation, can be be detached myself from the song and have the technical ability to touch 2-3 things and make the song the way it goes, or have an artistic vision just based on mixing and mastering and take the song to that level. So it was a case-by-case scenario. It went really well. So at that point, I did a first album for Steve. We had a Grammy nomination, like Dance Album of the Year. At that moment, it was like album number 2 of Major Lazer, full of hits. Like the album was just like such a new, fresh vibe, a new, fresh approach on production. It was probably the first album where was a pure blending of style in one project, like dancehall mixed with like EDM, mixed with hip hop, mixed everything. So for me, it was so much fun. I was able to just, and Diplo, credits to him, he was probably the first one that he understand my role as a mixing and master engineer more on the creative side. And he say, all right, right, we'll give you what we have, take it from there and just go for it. And that was a lot of fun. And then during this process, we started to build Studio DMI as a company, because at the beginning it was me mixing, getting kind of overwhelmed, but enjoying the process. I apologize. I have a little bit of allergy, and in the studio it's dry air. Just
not the virus going there.
Not the virus, man.
So when these artists approach you, are they looking to divide the energy up a little bit? Because it seems like the hardest thing is people managing their bandwidth of their daily life. They're wearing so many different hats now. They're having to be making TikTok videos, being present on all these platforms, and then they hear the song too many times. I mean, that's kind of when they call you in.
That's true. One thing is also interesting. I see a development between 2012 and say 2015, 16 mentality and now is actually changed. So interesting. 2012 and 13, the concern was for North American producer was, damn, the European stuff sounds really loud. How you can get that loud? You know, like that was the thing. And I was kind of like my journey started with the Italian electro scene, like back then, the Crookers and the Conga Rock and Bloody Bitter, all the stuff was really loud. And we had a formula on that. So, and initially it was like, we want to compete. At the beginning it was all about, I want to compete like loudness, with loudness. I want to have the punch that the Dutch record had back then. Then the transition became more, exactly what you mentioned, more like, now I'm touring, now I'm busy. I want to maximize my time. It's too expensive for me to sit in the studio to try to mix my song for like 2 weeks and not having get a good result.
Right, so, working backwards.
Exactly right. So there was like right now, what I feel is, especially in the last year, it became more like, I want to make sure that my music has, by default, a super pro sound. And then I don't want to invest too much time. I want to just focus on writing. Now there's, to me, a lot of needs of quality writing, where a lot of producer concern is, I need to have super, super solid, strong songs. And I don't want to have a concern about the final post-production of my song. I want to focus to actually get hits. So in my point is like, I'm not worried about making the hits. I'm worried about make sure if you have a potential hit, I'm going to put my expertise to bring the best possible version of your own version, if it makes sense.
And so when you hear these mixes where you think they could be improved, or what's jumping out at you? Is it a lack of loudness or balance, or what's the most obvious thing?
So far, it's crazy. And I keep telling a lot of producers is don't for loudness. A lot of producer, they're jeopardizing. They make decision just to achieve loudness on a rough mix. They're compromising so many things during the mix just to get louder. And I say, guys, I mean, we're minus 14 laughs now on Spotify. I understand you want to have a loud master for your shows. I understand that. But don't come to and because for me, to achieve loudness and retain dynamics, have a routine. And also I'm lucky because doing this every day, a record a day pretty much, I'm able to learn, apply, learn, and apply. When you're a producer, you're mixing what you're producing. So if you make a lot of songs, you make 40 songs in a year, you mix 40 records. I made 40 records in over a month. So I'm more exposed. So what I always recommend is don't push yourself to compromise your drum, your transient, and use distortion everywhere just because you want to get to -4 RMS. Don't worry for now. Just give an honest balance. Don't worry about the loudness. I'll take care of it. So the struggle sometimes is to make a pro-sounding vocal. That's across the board. A lot of people, they struggle because even a dance track and then they A and B with a big pop song is like, man, my vocal doesn't sound as pro as the pop song. So I want to have a dance song with a pop vocal, pro-sounding process vocal. So that's the struggle number one. Two is I want to get my track loud, but then when I got the rough mix, I got a rough mix that is so loud and I can't even understand. So most of the time I find myself to say, send me a rough, don't worry about the level for now. So that's kind of like, another one is, I can put like the number 3 on the charts is try to get so wide that now is not wide anymore.
Right.
Makes sense?
It's just mush. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like...
Yeah, and it's so weird, and what translates and like what elements have to be narrow, like the bass. You know, the weirdest thing I've run into lately is I'm doing these collaborations where guys they have OTT on everything, which is fine. It's great. Maybe they're doing a parallel blend on it, so it's not overboard. But everything is peaking like 8 dB over 0 in Ableton on every bus, and it's hard to work back from that and keep the vibe too. So you're kind of like, do you leave it just? Do you redline to headline, or do you step it all down, you lose the feels, but you've got to regain that.
Yeah.
And so there's that issue, which is interesting, sort of like you don't want to make more work for yourself with the collaboration. And then the other thing I notice is I'll be playing a mix out, be road testing it live, and a song that sounds loud and you're pushing it in the studio actually can sound quieter out. It just doesn't sound as full. It's like this weird balance of it's not just like the LUFS is only really one part of it, right? Like it's a guideline, but if you hit that target, that doesn't mean everything's great and it's balanced, right? Like it's a very rough guideline for you to follow.
Yeah, I have a theory that actually I'm applying this theory is it's perceived loudness based on frequency response. So if you have a lot of 1K, 2K, 3K, let's say 1K to 6K area that has a certain perceived loudness in a proper compression, you're gonna feel, if you don't look your last meter or like your RMS peak relationship, just as a perceive, if you compress the mid-range and then you expand, that's like, this is the core of my workshop essentially. If I treat music where I in some way, I want to explain in few words. So if I'm able to bring the mid-range in front and have the mid-range that is steady, and then take the bottom, the first 2 octaves on the bottom, and the top 2 octaves on the top, and make them do the opposite, expansion on the top and the bottom, compression on the mid-range. Now what I'm getting is the presence of the mid-range that really affect perceived loudness, even on Spotify. We did some tests. If I do this on Spotify, equal level, the Spotify will allow me to have, wow, your track is louder. No, it's louder on the right spot, so the mid-range. The bottom and the top, expansion on the bottom of the top, allow me to feel a track that is not overly compressed. Normally, if you take a multiband and you compress heavily the bottom and the top, the track has no movement. So the top transient, which is the snare, the ride, the open hi-hats, everything that the steps, everything is like a short transient. If you compress, you have no movement or dynamic range, and over time feels like it's piercing my ears. It's like it's getting kind of like annoying because it's become one frequency. If I'm able to retain movement on the top movement on the bottom. Now I get a perceived pleasant movement and groove the way I want to perceive the music. Now, if I compress the mid-range a little bit, now I'm getting best of both worlds. The typical effect of 90s and 80s mixes that sound so quiet today, it was not caused only about peak RMS relationship, was caused about stylistic approach. The stylistic approach on the 80s, the 90s, especially the 80s, or quality music from late 70s, like Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson. A lot of those records, they have a little bit of smiley face because there was a trend back then. A trend back then that you have in the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s, you have a hi-fi system. They have the loudness button, the famous loudness button. There was just like a bump, almost like a back EQ, a bump on the bottom and the top. So modern sounding mixing can translate on loud perceived mixes if you are really good about understanding how you want to translate.
I think it's so interesting that the point you said in one of your videos earlier was so interesting about tempo, the perception of tempo and the high-end transients is so interesting because I even noticed that DJing at different venues, songs will feel slower. Depending what the sound is like in the room, it'll sound 2 or 3 BPM slower. And I'm going, what is going on? Even that's with the pool parties too. Maybe the way the acoustics are hitting the room, maybe it's the speakers are blown out, but that audio is all an illusion. You're shaping illusions. That's your job. You're the expert illusionist with audio.
I agree. I know about Morgan, about the perceived slow effect is always caused by slow release time on compression. And the perfect example on nightclub system or festival system is a special nightclub system that has been calibrated from a tech guy that it was doing this for like 30 years. It's still calibrating with a slow release time on the limiter to make sure that they don't blow the speakers. That makes the music slow. So what it does, you hit the limiter, and then the limiter, the moment then there is a breakdown, it starts to go away, and then hit slam again, and then stay. It's almost like try to use like a compressor to like release all the way slow. You're gonna feel like a slow release time, and then affect the transient and the envelopes. The envelopes essentially, when you enhance transient, you enhance the groove, and the song sounds faster. If you slow down, essentially, is release time.
It's so interesting to me because when I'm road testing songs, every system sounds so different. Like every club, and I'm guessing that they're just going through the typical chain of, your music's going through an additional compressor and limiter, just even to the monitors, to the mains, to the main house system, where it's like the breakdown suddenly gets super loud. It's so interesting because, if you're squashing your mix, it's going to go through another couple of stages of getting squashed once again. But it seems like the only way around that is to really have a balanced mix where you've got that slope. I mean, is that something you try to aim for, is a balanced spectral slope and not have any big octave holes in it?
I do, Morgan, actually, yeah. Another thing is I try to make sure that I don't squash the side informations. Like, sometimes I feel a lot of producers, they risk to don't see music the way it is. So if you think about it, if you put reverb, the reverb is pure out of phase information. So you have a vocal, it's some indifference, some everything phase, difference everything out of phase. You bring the reverb out of phase, and you start to constantly make wider. This means you're bringing out of phase information up. Now you go over limit and compression, and you go now on excess nightclub that is constantly running with 4 dB of limiting. Now you squeeze and squash the side even more, and now become unnatural. Now you have the lead vocal being with a cloud on top of this out of phase reverb.
Yeah, it's crazy that, and then all the basic stuff of just getting back to phase in general. That you mix in 2 tracks by the same producer, and he's using the same kick. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Like, thankfully, it doesn't happen too much now. But I've noticed that with some producers where they're using the same template, and it's like, oh wow, the kick drum is gone, and just EQing stuff may not even fix it that much. It'll still be out of phase in the mids and the tops. God, there's so much that is revealed. It's like a magnifying glass. Everything's amplified live. I mean, it's just like when you're mixing and mastering stuff, every flaw is amplified to a new level. Do you do a lot of stuff where you go in? I mean, are you trying to open up bandwidth and in the mix whenever possible? Like you're obviously filtering stuff. You're watching for little spikes. Are you just managing voltage, or how do you approach it?
Well, so I have a routine here during, you talk about during the mix and mastering phase.
Yeah.
So usually what I do, I prep the mix, and the first things I do, I try to listen as a listener, and I take notes myself, and I try to do really, really quick when I don't know the song yet. When I go on a technical and I start to analyze the track, I look key first. I absolutely want to look for the key of the track, and if it's a critical key, if it's a track on C, and it's a trap track, I need to have a conversation with the producer. Say, come on, man.
Transpose, give him a capo. Yeah.
Right. So, I'm literally try to make sure what I can do to not over complicate things at the beginning. Especially, that's another thing. Recently, I'm going from more a minimalistic approach in what I do. If I find myself, they have a chain of 8 plugins to achieve something on a track, there is something that I can do better to avoid that. So, and then usually what I do, for example, I copy and paste the track twice, and I try different approach on processing the same element in different ways. Back to the phase concern is when I deal with stereo informations, I try to understand if there's been damage in some way from sound designing, and if something I can do, and there's always based on a relationship with the producer, to go back one step before and say, hey, if you have silent that has an internal distortion, if you have serum, you're using distortion and compression after that, use an EQ, there's no linear phase, and compression again. How you doing? I'm asking questions to understand. And then a lot of cases, the easiest way for me is like, okay, do you like what you have? Great. Let's use this as a reference. Let's rebuild that in a proper way. So I'm asked to send me totally dry stem, and I'm going to literally rebuild using different tools in a different way to retain his vision, but then achieve a more clean and more like proper, translation of his idea.
Do you ever have guys go back and regain stage their synths and stuff so they have some headroom, or do you request stems giving like 10 dB of headroom or something crazy? I
do. Sometimes I still receive 4416 stems, and I ask to please send me, if they can, 32-bit floating files. That way I can rebuild dynamics if I need. That's a problem. Sometimes over clipping takes away the edge of the transient, and I can rebuild it. So sometimes I do. Yeah, I ask. Gain staging is a big deal, especially on synth. I find that a lot of producers, they use like 3 or 4 layers of synth to create one synth, which is fine. Right. But then those 3 layers individually, they're phasing each other because they're using 3 or 4 different EQ. They do a phase shift. Then when they blend in one bus and they process the bus, they're actually enhancing the issues of each individual layer. So in that case, I'm asking, hey, send me the individual layers separate. Let me do some treatment. And most of the time, I'm able to get, again, a clean version with the same vision.
So you're seeing phase issues from people overstacking their plugins too that are not like delay compensated properly. So there's phasing issues. Yeah.
For example, the typical one, if you use Saturn from Fab Filter in oversampling mode, so HD mode, and then you parallel, out of phase entirely. Yeah. So, and if you stack with another layer on the same octave that's a different processing, now you're really going to feel it. So I use SSL X Phase, which is a plugin, very simple, from SSL that allow me to change the phase by feeling. So what I do, I literally, for example, on kick drum, sometimes I receive one kick stem that's been made by 3 or 4 kick drum. I don't have the luxury to go back and separate those kicks. I use X Phase from SSL, and I do a short loop on the attack on the middle and the tail of the kick. And between those, I kind of like move, and I find when I feel, to give you a feeling of in phase, when I feel the low end now is going between my two speakers. Instead of going like this,
right.
It goes like this.
Huh.
So, yeah.
So you're independently juggling the timing of those three components. Yeah,
Correct.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think it's so tricky with the plugin management. It can be hard, especially if people are really driving these waveforms hard, where you can't even see where the phase is starting, if it's going up or down. Sometimes it's another reason to gain stage it properly, right?
Yep. Now with a lot of use of 808s and kick, which is, let me tell this, Morgan, to me it's always funny because I'm old enough when you say, yeah, I have the kick and I have an 808. Well, the 808 was a drum, it's a drum machine, man. It's, you know what I mean? It's funny, we call the 808 now be like a long kick, like a sub.
Right.
We call it 808, but 808 is actually a drum machine that has a kick drum that you can make a very long decay. And so now we call 808 the bass. But that relationship between the kick and the 808 is creating so many issues because people they try so hard to make this 808 to cut through the mix so big that they're fighting, the 808 is fighting with the entire mix. Yeah. So one of my main concern, I do a lot of trap pop or like trap stuff. I mean, right now the 808 is being used everywhere on pop music, so it's related to everything, is to have not distorted 808 where the edges is now become like a square wave but remain a sine wave. A lot of people, they push the 808 to become literally a square wave where there's not much to do. So sometimes I ask, man, send me the dry 808 and let me reprocess. And I find myself that as far as side chaining with 808s, it's way better to work on automation and copy as a sidechain effect than trust a compressor. Because the kick relationship, when you have attack of the kick, decay, and 808 start, if I'm able to precisely design that with my automation on my DAW and then copy and paste or bounce in place, I can trust that more to have over time a compressor react from sidechain.
Right. And you don't even know, like I know in Ableton, a lot of guys don't realize this, but if you're not sending a MIDI trigger to the sidechain plugins and you're adding, usually it's UAD plugins or ones that are adding more latency, your sidechain will be off by like an eighth note. It's huge.
Exactly right. Exactly right. In my case that I have an hybrid setup, I work with analog gear and plugin at the same time. I really don't want to even have a doubt. I want to trust 100%. And to do it, it's automation. That's like, no doubt it's going to be fine.
I remember a while ago you were telling me, I think it's really cool what you do with like standard clip, these plugins. Like you're like a real innovator with clipping and knowing how to use it in the right way, good clipping. And you were saying some of these ways you're losing bass if you're clipping stuff. How do you approach it using clipping so you're not losing stuff, so you're not making too much of a compromise? And how do you make the 808s cut through without having to just filter everything?
That's a good question. So mostly right now I try to stay away from one clipper dealing with a lot of information. I like to use multiple clipper spread across my bus. I have a busing system that I use that it's a template, and I know that every song that I do, it's kick, bass, low percussion, high percussion, bass, synth low, synth high, effects, and vocal. That's my go-to sum my mixes. Now, if I spread clipping across the board, minus vocals, minus synth, I'm able to get a less heavy loading of clipping on one single plugin. So, for example, what I usually do is relationship between kick and bass. Let's say it's 3 dB difference between the 808 or the bass of the sine wave and the kick. Then the 3 dB difference, sometimes I feel that the kick is the only transient that's going out of what is my range. So if I'm able to clip the top of the mountain, not shave, not limiting, I don't want to do this. Right. I literally want to just like this. And if I do on linear phase mode with standard clip, maybe 16 times oversampling, And if I do on mid side, if I have more information, let's say I have a kick that is mono, but then I have low percussions, which is, to me, low percussion are 1 kilohertz down. So clap, snare, rim shot, tom, all that is low percussion. In my bass, I feel that the sum of those low percussion, it give me like transient that they're pleasing, but they're taking too much headroom. Now, if I clip those a little bit, I'm able to retain the vibe and the movement, the groove, but again, gain some headroom. My concern is if I have reverb or things go on stereo on the low percussion groove, if I work on mid-side clipping, I'm able to clip the mid, not clip the side at all. Right. That's, again, give me a perception. So to me now, the game is spread clipping across the buses, try to stay away from clip the side. And in case of my master bus, if I want to get louder, has to be a clipper at the beginning of the chain all the time to kind of say, okay, I reduce my crest factor. So if my track goes like this, if I only go like this, I might gonna have less problem. I can get louder. Now, if I do multi-stage clipping and limiting, I'm able to massage my sound and just go up little by little instead of like trying to achieve 7 dB of clipping and hoping that it's not changing the envelope, create distortion, clip the side.
Yeah, I love that concept. And it was really eye-opening in your video where it was, just push it up so that you shave off the peak. Yeah. And you're not messing with the sound, but it's voltage that you're temporarily reducing, just that very top bit, because it's funny how you can A/B stuff and it'll sound just as good. It probably sounds even better with the clipper on. Yeah. And it's not taking up all this room on the bus. It's like you're almost managing voltage or data. You're kind of compressing it a little bit in a way where I think it's such an interesting way to approach it. Because
talk about sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that the it's an emotional decision. Like we're trying to get the maximum emotion with the minimal amount of voltage. I think there was a book called Mixing with Your Mind.
And even if you go back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, radio station, everything was dealing with voltage even back then. And now it's more like a stylistic and technical approach. But for example, one of the biggest mistakes that I see now, especially with Spotify, the people, especially major label, they try to force you to do an actual -14 last master. On bass music, you can't. You cannot. On trap, you can't, because you're going to change the envelope. So if I really want to be no clipping, no limiting, -2 or -1 peak and -14 laughs, well, I'm going to change the nature of the mix. Your song will sound different, because what we're doing with clipping is musical. So when you clip, sometimes what I do, I sum my kick and my 808 on analog, on one of my summing in mono, and then on the way in, I clip that. And that's like almost like a glue effect that I'm getting, especially changing the note of the 808 when I go E to D. So they're gluing together in a certain way. Now, and then when I hit my AD converter that I'm clipping even more, now I kind of like glue the entire song together in a stylistic way that I like it. It's just like, it's modern, is the way, current stuff sounds like. Now, if you want to say, well, I want to capture now to have enough dynamic range to sound better on Spotify, well, you might sound better, but you will sound different. And so if you do a ballad, you do like a pop song, okay, it's a song that has no drums, and I got it. Yeah, definitely. You don't expect to hear like a jazz song be clipped. Okay. But a house track, or like my work, I did a song, I mixed a song for Diplo, it's called On My Mind, that's quite popular right now. And that is extremely loud. When I did we did the version for Spotify, I was not able to do it. I literally say, wow, let's let it, because it was changing the kick and bass relationship so much. It was pointless.
So it was hitting a higher, it was hitting LUFS. Like what was your target at that point?
Well, so that track sounds crazy. I mean, it's like, this song is like -2.5.
Wow.
It's so loud. Then now the only difference that I did for Spotify, and because it was capture -4 from my converter, so without any plugin was getting that loud, I left that way. So it's the Spotify version, yes, 1.5 RMS more. So it's like from -3.5 loss, I went like -5 or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, so basically you have to choose the destination. You have to choose sort of the song first, and then maybe think about the platform secondarily.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Usually here at Studio DMI, when we send a song for approval to a client, we always say, you approve the main mix. And the main mix sometimes is dynamic version, loud version. And we recommend the loud version for festival use or DJ set use, and the dynamic is for everything else. And usually it's about 1 dB RMS difference, 1.5 dB RMS difference.
So not huge. Okay.
Not huge.
Yeah.
And then after they approve the actual master, then we deal with whatever the song needs for streaming. And sometimes it's literally nothing. We recommend to use what they have. Sometimes we actually find, like, especially on down-tempo pop stuff, like 100 BPM stuff with vocals, sometimes we capture again with -12, -10 LUFS for Spotify. Works because we'll compromise a tiny bit. We retain the mix, but we do less clipping, less limiting. So it's a case-by-case scenario right now.
So what are your favorite ways to do this clipping process? Like, maybe give me an overview of your setup and how you're using analog stuff for certain parts of the process and how you're using software tools.
Right. So the way usually I do, I mix through my summing. I have 32 channels, which is 16 dedicated to synth effects and vocals, 16 dedicated to drums. Most likely I use 8 for drums, and I use 2 summing devices to do that. And then when I mix into EQ and compression on my stereo bus. That is like analog, fully analog. I have a Studio DMI EQ they built for us. It's fantastic. And I mix through compression and EQ. That's the sound that I have. Now, on the way in, I always monitor my mixes post-conversion. So through my console, I slightly clip my converter as a sonic impact to my mixes, and I listen after the clipping without any plugin post, just the clipping. That it's like, and they become my sound, and I mix through that. When I get to the point that I'm commit to the mix, and I'm going on the mastering mode, then most likely is the next day. I never try to mix end of the day and do the mastering stage. I always try to sleep on it and go back the next day with different state of mind. Now, usually my analog clipping, it's a combination right now of a Better Maker limiter and the Dangerous AD Plus as a natural clipper and limiter, because I'm literally pushing my converter over 2 dBs. So I do about 2 dB of clipping on the converter. I do about 1.5 to 2 dB on the Better Maker. So I'm getting in that essentially I'm fine. Now, that type of clipping and limiting from the analog stage allow me to have a reduced crest factor in the box. So my waveform looks bigger in short words, like, and I feel that I have less peaks to deal with. So right. In the box, it's a mix of 2 clipper. I use standard clip first. I use a Diamond Lift. It's a plugin that we developed here at Studio DMI. Those 2, one as a technical purpose, which is I want to be the most transparent way to gain the level that I want. And I do 16, about oversampling 16 times, a linear phase mode. And again, I do on mid side, so I divide and be able to hit only the mid. And then when I get to the level that I want, lift, it's almost like the final touch of natural, a mix of clipping and limiting. The Diamond Lift has different modes of clipping and limiting, and they're kind of like a mix of emulation of analog clipping from the converter with the internal digital clipping. And I found like a sweet spot between them. And that's my final stage. I try always, if I can, to do intersample peak protection, and I use limiter 6 for that. I find the most transparent one. I really don't like the Pro L intersample peaks.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It just changed the groove in some way. It just, I'm not a fan. I find the limiter 6 is extremely transparent. So, and I try to finalize my master at minus 0.3 all the time to avoid the MP3 conversion will push up. And if I finalize a 0, most likely my MP3 is going to go up plus 0.1. And in general, if you play your iPhone, strictly 0 dB, most likely you have distortion.
Right.
If you play a minus 0.3, it's probably...
Is it going through another layer of compression and limiting through the iPhone? Doesn't the iPhone put some DSP on stuff additionally?
I think so.
I feel like I can hear it almost I can really hear it in spoken word stuff or broadcasts where I was almost thinking like, wow, are they using some crazy broadcast compressor? But I started to hear it on different TV shows and movies. And I'm like, wait a minute, it sounds like they're using the same compressor, but it's the phone. it's the iPad.
I agree. And also a lot of people that underestimate the Instagram that right now is very popular.
Yes.
And surprisingly, people still don't know the Instagram is sum in mono. What this means is when you load something on Instagram, they sum in mono. This means your music is going to go up plus 4 dB. So usually when I do a version for Instagram, I always lower minus 4 dB peaks. That way, when you're being coded in Instagram, it's going to go up 4 dB if you're not distorting. So many Instagram posts, they have full distortion for that reason.
I was going to bring that up. Like, it's crazy where you have stuff that's been mixed well and mastered, and you go, what the hell? Like, it sounds like crap in your little trailer, your recap from the tour video. And if your video guy isn't aware of how to mix it properly, a lot of these guys, they're editing video. They're not maybe sound guys.
Exactly.
So you leave extra headroom for Instagram.
I do.
And why are they summing it? Is it just it's just compressing? They're just trying to get a nice loud sound and have it be a smaller file.
Well, what they do, I think they try to minimize the use. So the sum in mono, I hope they will change it. Will change in the future. Right now, it's almost like with analog, you just sum in mono. It does like left and right like this. So it's pushing 4 dB up. And so if you have a very loud track that is picking 0, you're going 4 dB over. That's not pleasant.
Wow. All right. So with your workflow, with the analog and digital stuff, are you seeing though that one area provides a big advantage? Like analog is better for this and more forgiving for this part of the process, and that digital is better for this stage. What does analog do best?
For me, heavy lifting. The way I can describe it in the easiest way is heavy lifting analog, surgical digital. So everything that I can control, it make micro decision way better in the box. Vibey stuff. So lift of low end, bottom and top, saturations. It just still translates better to me on the analog domain. To me, the big advantage, and what I try to explain is I'm using 2 ends really quick to make one decision on analog, something that I can't do on digital. Right. So in front of me, I have a 3-bay, and I'm able to control my compressor, control the top ends of my EQ in one time. So there's also a feeling that allow me to mix faster. So to me, it's like mix faster, trust, especially heavy lifting, a track that needs a lot of top ends. If I do it with my analog EQ, seems and feels more natural sounding than Pro Q3 pushing 12 dB over 5K. As far as compression, now with plugin we're getting way better. So till like 5 years ago, there was no way to have a plugin compressor to sound as good as a piece of hardware. Now we're getting very, very close. Even with EQ, we're getting very close. The difference to me is the workflow again, and just like the lifting. And usually when I do even basic mastering, my way of doing is like fixing things in the box first. So resonance and anything that's like problematic, and I trust a digital EQ for that, and then gain some vibe and tone from the analog side.
And how are you recalling all these settings? So if somebody wants to make a mix change, are you taking pictures? I know it's the age-old question.
Photos.
Photos. Yeah.
We are two in the room here, and Rob, my assistant engineer, he's constantly doing recall and notes. And recall is like, so photos of the 3 bass. On Studio One that we're using as a DAW, there's a beautiful plugin. It's called Pipeline. On Pipeline, it's a way to go out of the DAW into the analog world and go back in with a plugin. You can even parallel plugin with hardware with no phase issue. It's unbelievable. It's like the only DAW allow me to do that. And then you can take a screenshot, a photo, and upload the photo inside of the plugin. So 1 year later, which is super cool, I'm able to load a session of Morgan's song, and then on Pipeline, on my kick drum, I open the Pipeline and I see a photo of my Q-Tex L1B with the actual settings. So I just need to go there and recreate it. So that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Oh, and back to what you were saying earlier too, in terms of being careful of stuff phasing with parallel, is there a best practice you use? I mean, you were saying Saturn had issues if you're in HD mode.
Yeah.
How do you know? I mean, you have to do it by ear, but sometimes you can't hear it. It might be more subtle. What do you recommend to producers and mixers to make sure that, like, do they use a linear multiband EQ on, their master, or what about the individual channels and the bus channels?
I find myself, for example, let's talk about plugins that are very famous, like Fat Filter Pro Q. So if I use the Pro Q3 on mono information, I'm less concerned for some reason. Like, I'm not worried about working. I'm fine working natural phase on anything that has mono information only, or let's say single notes. My concern is working on not linear phase mode when I'm dealing with a lot of information. There's a lot of phase and out of phase information on purpose. So if I take big pads and chords on a trend song, there's a blend of so many decisions being made. Now I'm using an EQ that is not a linear phase mode, and then I do big, like 4 or 5 dB peaks, especially that have like a very close Q. I'm risking to change the phase shift, happening, that maybe if you're not focusing on the issue, you just don't know, just keep going. And at the end of the mix, especially after mastering, when you squeeze dynamics, you're going to feel that something is off. So my recommendation is stay away from not linear phase when you're dealing with mastering chain, big vocal busing, when you have like the lead vocal plus background and a reverb. Make sure to work on linear phase mode when you want to try to reshape the total amount of information that you have on your bus. Less is a problem if you're working for like a kick drum of a bass or like a mono lead. That's okay to work non-linear phase mode. You're not going to feel the effect much.
And is there any concern for producers? So many guys using Ableton these days, and I always wonder this too, with the stock EQ. If you're using the stock EQ, should you be doing everything like filtering with a low shelf and a high shelf to do stuff, so you have a little resonant bump, at the root note, or should you just stay away from the stock EQ entirely? I like it because of workflow, but What about the Ableton EQ? Now they have channel EQ, which is supposed to sound a little different. What do you think?
Right. What I felt is all those EQ, they're not so much difference when you're reducing. I feel the biggest problem is lifting stuff up. One mistake that I find myself, just a professional opinion, a lot of producers, they use multiple EQ stage when you have a no linear phase EQ doing a series of things. And then you have a compressor, you have another no linear phase from Ableton Live to do a shelf. And then you have another one doing this. So those multiple things, if you're able to just minimize and just do it from one single EQ, it's better because you're adding, phasing into phasing into phasing. I'm not opposed about the Logic EQ or the Ableton EQ when you do very small little changes. I'm worried about when I see this like big bump. Right. Another things that I notice, a lot of people, they bad gain staging, they forget that even if your track is like you're hitting -2 peak, and then you do very small decision, it's fine. But then when you take the mid range, you go +7. Now you start to go, you start to create distortion on the mid range part. Similar concern on the low end. Please, when you find the part of the songs where the bass line is moving on the lower part, because we forget that is a digital edge-room. So not necessarily because you don't hear it, the DAW was not affected. So this means if you're pushing the 35 hertz, that you maybe don't feel it because you don't have speakers in your room allow you to hear the 35, the DAW will, and then you're gonna get distortion across the board caused by the first octave, like the C note at the bottom.
Right. I've heard some crazy stuff where in like RX7, RX8, that where you can actually pull the fundamental down and to keep it from clipping. Like it's the physics of sound that don't even really understand completely. But do you ever get crazy surgical like that and actually change the structure of the sound?
Oh, so we use RX7 as well, just to like dithering and post-production. RX7 is so crazy, especially if you're able to deal with 32-bit floating file. You can be so creative. You can do so many little things. You can make very small decision. Like I was able maybe a year ago to take the edges of overly clipping of the transient, not the entire transient, just a portion of that. Things that you can do that are so crazy cool. And RX7 is a fantastic tool. Absolutely.
Yeah, the declipper does some amazing stuff. And I think it's a really good point you brought up too earlier about having your stems at 32-bit if you can. Because I know some mixers, they'll be like, one of my mixers I work with, he'll say like, well, it's just bigger files. It doesn't make a difference for me. But if you can, and it does take up more space, but if you can, a lot of people don't realize that you can pull the trim down in clip gain in Ableton or Pro Tools, and it's like, boom, you can recover all those clipped peaks. It's like a magic trick. And I don't think anyone really explained that very well. I didn't even realize that. Ableton barely explained that.
It's crazy because it's like it's a way almost like don't be concerned. Imagine how much time you're saving of, hey man, you send me this as clipping, it's distorting, you went too loud, versus like, oh, don't worry, just pull the level down. That's it. So the 32-bit floating is so cool. And sometimes when we get files, they're like 16-bit to say, man, do you have a chance to at least send 24 or 32? It's like, oh man, to me sound the same. Sound the same, but my intervention, what I can do is way different.
Do you have any guys sending you higher res than 48K for sessions?
Yeah, 48K, it's a standard on the east of the world, man. Like pretty much everything we're getting from China, Japan, and Taiwan and Vietnam is 48. And
are they going above that?
Huh?
Are they going above that? Are you getting 96K or the
96? It's kind of annoying because it takes so much, and I use a lot of our own plugin. They're very CPU heavy, and I don't want to deal. I'm fine with 96 only on stem mastering or stereo mastering, but big session, it's a problem. No, on the pop world, we had in the past 96K full stems that I end up put on RX and convert to 48. One thing I recommend to always go F or whatever you're getting. So usually if I get 96, I do 48 mixes. If I get 88, I go 44. There's a mathematic. I don't know much about it, but there is an effect on that. 48 a lot. Now, for video purpose, the 48 is great. So when we're getting 48 mixes, I deliver a 48 master, and I do, of course, the 44, 16, and 24, and all the other versions. But there is a little sonic improvement 48, actually. Yeah. Not much a CPU concern of like 48, 44 versus 96K is problematic.
Things just start breaking. Plugins especially like boutique plugins, I feel like. Oh. So, and speaking of plugins, tell me about all the plugins you've developed, and like, why did you want to start making plugins? Were you not happy with what was out in the marketplace beyond, having branding and things? What was missing?
Right. So about 3 years ago, became good friend with Italian developer named Giancarlo that is the owner of a company called Acoustic Audio. And I started to like follow, kind of be very impressed about his plugins. And then for years and years, I had like a go-to way to mix. My stereo bus EQ was a combination of 3 different hardwares. Essentially, one I was doing the top, one the mid-range, one at the bottom. And Giancarlo came for the NAMM show and got the studio say, I show, my sound, and is like, well, what about if we just make us a plugin? So he triggered the idea to me. And I start from there. I was like, wow, if we can do that, this means I can not only use on my stereo bus, which is I still use the analog side, but I can use this on multiple buses. And so we create a color EQ, which is essentially was 3 EQ in 1. And we actually Frankenstein even that. We make like changes that became something kind of unique. So the entire Acoustica is based on convolution. So it's sampling technology. It's like a sampling. Imagine to sample like a reverb, like a piano, just, and CPU very heavy, but sounds phenomenal. So we created Color EQ 3 years ago. And at that point, we kind of get hooked about this. It's like, wow, what about if we go for clipping? And then we did lift. There was kind of like same concept about what is really essential here in my studio that I want to try to replicate. After that, the attention of our industry came in. They Pensato, and a lot of people say, wow, you guys have something really cool. I'm starting to get a lot of good support. And Black Friday of 2 years ago, we released a compressor with Greg Wells. It's called Lift, and a lot of success. And Greg was so good. He has like EMI compressor and a lot of compressors. So it took like 6 months. We sent the compressor to Italy. They sample so many ways. It came out fantastic. And then from there, this past Black Friday, we have released the Pensato EQ with Dave Pensato. And just the experience to work with Dave for like 6 months was fantastic. He had this idea of going back 35 years of his career and say, I want to get every best possible EQ that worked for me in the past and make it as a band instead of be as an EQ. So essentially was my 10K from the Neve 10E1.
Yeah.
I want to have like the 16K from that one with a proportional Q, but the other one is going to be this with a shelf. So it was like a monumental work, like huge work to get it done. So much fun. And then now we're kind of like on the plugin world as a passion kind of like type of project that I can apply and use every day, but it started as a passion thing and became a business side of our company.
Awesome. And I know you were working on you're kind of into gear from the 90s, sort of semi-vintage stuff. So tell me about that. Like when you're bringing in these new gear possibilities and different chains, what are you looking for? How are you using this stuff?
Yeah. So recently, for a long time, but recently I'm into lo-fi, cheap 90s gear used for creative purpose. So I have a rack on my left side, you can see now, that I have like a Lazy's compressor that's been modified. I have a Neotech 2-channel EQ with the API transformer. I have a bunch of old stuff that I repurposed for reprocessed stems. So when I want to get a certain sound, it's just fun for me to go out of the box, process it, recreate a stem. There's a different vibe. Similar to doing like parallel compression, if you think when you have like your source, your parallel, and you want to change the tone, I'm doing with that mentality. When I'm kind of like most time, I actually parallel what I have in the box, giving a certain vibe. I have an MXR limiter that I love so much. It took like 2 months to get it sound right because those units have the noise floor is ridiculous. Like,
so to get them right, are you modifying them yourself or what's happening?
Recap. So we have two tech guys that we use to do a full recap. Most of those gear, they have like 25 years, 30 years. They're leaking in now. This sounds like they have a lot of noise floor, they lose dynamics. So we recap entirely. Sometimes we change power supply, we add transformers. The Neotech essentially is like the sound of pretty much all the major laser stuff, or snare to have this like heavy, almost like saturated transient that was coming from the Neotech, which is like doesn't sound equally from the 90s version because as it's being mod, but yes, kind of like that tone. And I'm using Danger Liaison, which is a kind of like digital patch bay that I can instead of going on a patch bay and physically patch in, which is you have our time to figure out what I'm listening, because the time that you patch out, you don't know. I have like on and off really quick digital patch bay that allow me to really almost as a plugging effect, but with the analog side.
Yeah, it's like that. Even 2 seconds, what is it? People say, oh, there's 3 seconds and your brain forgets it. I think it's even less than that. I think it's half a second, it's toast. You don't even know the gain difference. I mean, because you're really diligent probably about bypassing the plugins and making sure you're keeping the loudness, or at least bringing the RMS down.
Post gain at the end of the chain to make it equal after processing.
Equal to your ears in terms of how it sounds, or voltage level?
Voltage. So essentially, let's say a typical thing is I'm eating my master chain and I go from B minus 12 to minus 5. And then now at the end of my chain, I put like a gain plugin, or I use my console that's really, really cool that can lower an A and B before and after the chain. I want to hear everything that I decide to do, compression, limiting, multiband, with the same gain as before the chain. So before, after the chain, same gain. Right.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, man. And it's funny with all the old school gear too. I've been using the 3630, the old Daft Punk compressor.
That's what I have here.
Oh my God. It's insane. I mean, it's funny because if you go and search it and you pull up the forums, people trash talk it, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Amazing. I have two. And it's unreal. And it's so good. And even sonically, people think, oh, like $40 compressor will make the track sounds like narrower, and no, it sounds really good, and it gives natural pumping. And
I use the external audio effect in Ableton. I just bust stuff out. Something feels cool about taking Ableton tracks and just busting them out, bringing them back in. It's not even really summing, but I couldn't believe it. Everything. I use the drum loop always to test stuff, and I'll just audition different sample packs through it. And I'm like, wow, everything sounds better. You can do parallel. You can do it 100%. Still sounds amazing.
Sounds so great. I believe it's one of my things. I also use I route through my gear. I'm able to do mid-side the entire rack. So I run my vintage rack on mid-side mode. This is a big deal because now most of that gear, they have one problem, which is left and right alignment. They're so old. Sometimes you need to do like +1 or -1 to just make it left and right. So sometimes you feel a little weird because you're losing the stereo. Now, running on mid-side, I have the Elysis compressor running. The left channel is the mid, the right is the side. So I'm also going to do the pumping more on the mid and less on the side.
I got to try that. Yeah, it's just funny that I like that better than a $3,000 compressor that I had here. And it was an SSL clone. It's a different beast. Like, this is an effect compressor.
This is an effect. This is like exactly. People, because that's another thing. The really hi-fi the big expensive compressor, they try to be so transparent to control dynamics for like use of like you have an orchestra. You want to make sure that when it hit and you have a spike of 10 dB, you retain that, you're compressing. When we try to do this is the opposite. We want to create as a vibey, as a groovy compressor. I have an SSL compressor in front of me. I do the same. It's just like I want to actually give the vibe of the compressor even more. I want to just like feel it.
Yeah. And I always wonder when I'm applying these treatments and making things more exciting, like, is this going to translate to smaller speakers? Will it carry? So do you have any go-to techniques for producers that really carry beyond? Because obviously it sounds amazing on big studio monitors, sound big in the club. And someone has the earbuds in, can that stuff transfer, or is it just it's an inevitable compromise that will happen?
It's a percentage-based type of improvement. Like you listen like a Daft Punk track from the 90s, I think you can have the same sense and feeling across any streaming headphones speakers. Of course, if you listen on a club system where you have a dynamic range, you can feel more. But I believe that you should do it and just, you're going to have like a last percentage of perceived effect in certain devices. When I listen on purpose, I have small speakers here. I have the focal, they're really small, but I still feel a little bit. It's just like percentage based, a little less. One thing I want to some way suggest for people like they don't have a super treated room, try to stay away to have the room sound. And how to do it is play very, very low. If you play super low, you're getting less return from the room. So, and people say, well, how can I describe low? Yeah, I can tell you it's going to be like 80 SPL, but an easy way to say it is, can you work and talk with somebody next to you without turning the volume down? If you can do that, that's a good way to measure, to me, a good level. Nice. Just like, almost like a working environment. You work in a desk, you're in an office, you have music going, you talk with your colleague. If you can do that in the studio, this means you're minimizing the room sound and reflection, and maybe reduce the dimension of your speakers and get closer to that. If you want to reduce essentially the room to come back to you, and not an acoustician, that's a purely like experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good tip. So moving forward, what else is coming down the pipeline? Like you have more plugins on the way. Are there any changes you're making to your setup and how you're working, especially in the current situation?
Thanks for the question, Morgan. So a lot of changes. Number one, as a company, Studio DMI, we have a concern, which is we want to make sure that people know we are not a nightclub. We are not out of business. So people say, wow, so this means everyone, it's home and you guys like pull the plug? We are not. We have people say, hey, you're in the middle of my album. Are you gonna still working on it? So first of all, we are 100%. So our team works remotely for the operation and administration side, and the engineers that work full-time in this building as normal, number one. Two, we're in to support the industry. And starting next week, we are going to support the industry in a different way. One is purely case by case with our core client to say, hey, you're just lost 25 shows. We want to make sure that you have music out at the same quality level. We don't want you to say, I'm scared, I lost so many shows, I'm going to just do my demo mixes and put it out to just make sure that I'm relevant, and the quality will go down. We want to support them. So we're going to extend literally line of credit for our core client to make sure we go through this storm. That's very important. From the educational side, we're working a system now to go and do online version of the workshop. It's going to be 6 episodes, once a week, 1 hour and 30 minutes. They cover the entire curriculum. It's going to be live stream, private, essentially, Zoom stream as far as the video. And it's going to be audio movers plug-in to stream directly from my DAW. It's going to be a fully in-the-box workshop. As far as the plugin, we're going to release 3 plugins this year. Well, let's see how it goes. That's the plan. Our company is based in Italy, so they're working remotely. It's a struggle right now, but if you're staying on schedule, we're going to release 3 plugins. 2 before the summer, after the summer, and Black Friday. I can't disclose the plugin because there's some like secret sauce on it, right. But good stuff.
Great. Well, I got to mess with the plugins more. We got to get on a mix sometime soon. I got so much new material coming out, and it's all about that though. Like having those fresh ears in the project, having somebody with, you've seen so many different artists, so many different genres coming through with everything from like reggaeton to hip hop to house music. Great, man. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but this has been awesome. Hope you had a good time.
I loved it. Thanks for the platform. I mean, I appreciate it. I mean, sharing the love. I mean, and what we do, it's a bless, you know. So thanks again, Morgan.
Great. And where can people find you online that are listening?
I'm very active on Instagram. So at Luca Pretolesi, that's my Instagram. And at Studio DMI, it's our company on Instagram. We're very active there. StudioDMI.com and Jacob He is the face and the connection between Studio MI and myself. And yeah, we're still 100%, to support the industry.
Great. Thanks for coming along, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Maury.
All right, brother. Take care.
Take care.
All right, so there you have it. My interview with Luca Pretolesi, incredible mixing and mastering engineer. We went very deep into the details, as usual, on Airwave. It was great to hear the inspiration behind developing his own line of plugins, his work process in the studio. There's so much more that goes on to his mixes than I even realized. I knew he was a technical guy, but the extent that he thinks about every transient in the mix, every dB of loudness, there's a lot of thought behind that process. So great to hear some insight into that. You can see why he is a 5-time Grammy-nominated producer. And it was great to hear some practical advice as well, things that could wreck your mix, things like phase issues, and how he likes to spread out plugin processing across the bus. So great talk with Luca. Hopefully we'll have him back again. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Airwave. Airwave is brought to you by RME Audio. Innovative, user-friendly, and high-quality digital audio solutions, RME offers a comprehensive range of audio interfaces, converters, and mic preamps, all based around its unique and innovative core technologies. Multi-platform connectivity across Windows and Mac OS and iOS class compliance has earned RME a global reputation for providing support to all users on all platforms. Visit rme-usa.com to learn more.